The sound of shattering glass pierced through the polished silence of the Black Hawk Saloon, followed by a woman's voice cutting sharper than any blade through the sudden stillness of the Colorado mountain town. Octavia Daniels stood in the center of the gaming hall, her silk evening gown the color of aged burgundy, her dark hair swept up in an elaborate style that spoke of Eastern sophistication. Around her, miners and gamblers froze with cards halfway to the table, whiskey glasses suspended in mid-air. She had just thrown a crystal tumbler against the mahogany bar, and now her green eyes blazed with a fury that made even the largest men in the room take a step back. "You will not speak to me that way," she said, her voice trembling with barely controlled rage as she faced the man in the expensive suit who had moments ago tried to grab her wrist. "Not here. Not anywhere." The man, a silver mine owner named Thornton whose wealth had bought him influence but not manners, sneered at her. "You work in a saloon, sweetheart. You don't get to play high and mighty with me." "I manage the books for this establishment," Octavia corrected, her chin lifting. "And I am not, nor will I ever be, interested in your attentions." It was May of 1876, and Black Hawk was thriving with silver fever. The town clung to the rocky mountainside, its wooden buildings stacked along narrow streets that wound between the peaks. At nearly 8,000 feet above sea level, the air was thin and clean, and the nights were cold even as spring tried to warm the days. The saloon where Octavia worked sat on the main street, one of the finer establishments where respectable men came to drink and play cards, where the owner prided himself on running a clean operation. Thornton took a step toward her, his face reddening. "You little," the lady said no. The voice came from the doorway, low and steady, with the kind of calm that suggested a man who did not need to raise his voice to be heard. Everyone turned to look at the cowboy, who stood silhouetted against the afternoon light streaming through the entrance. He was tall, lean in the way of men who spent their days in the saddle, with broad shoulders beneath a worn leather vest and a face that the sun had weathered to bronze. His hat was pushed back enough to reveal dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. At his hip hung a Colt revolver, but his hand rested nowhere near it. He simply stood there, watching, as though his presence alone should be enough to settle the matter. Thornton turned, sizing up the newcomer. "This is none of your business, Drifter." "Name's Knox Reeves," the cowboy said, stepping fully into the room, "and I'm making it my business." Octavia felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She had seen plenty of men try to play hero in her 22 years, particularly in the 6 months she had been in Black Hawk. Most of them wanted something in return. But there was something different in the way this stranger moved, something in the set of his jaw that suggested he would have stepped in regardless of who was being threatened. "She can handle herself," Knox added, his eyes flickering to Octavia with what might have been respect. "But seeing as you're too stupid to take a hint when a lady gives you one, I figured I'd translate into language you might understand better." The saloon owner, a portly man named Henderson, came rushing over, his hands fluttering nervously. "Now, gentlemen, please. There's no need for trouble." "Mr. Thornton, perhaps you should—" "Perhaps I should what?" Thornton snarled. "Let some nobody cowboy tell me what to do. In case you've forgotten, Henderson, I own half the silver claims in this county." "And I own a cattle ranch 3 hours south of here," Knox said calmly. "But you don't see me acting like it gives me the right to manhandle women. Funny how wealth affects different people." Octavia found herself moving before she could think better of it, stepping between the two men with her hands raised. "Enough, both of you. Mr. Thornton, you should leave." "And you," she turned to Knox, "I appreciate the sentiment, but I truly can handle my own affairs." Up close, she could see that Knox was younger than she had initially thought, probably no more than 25 or 26. There was a scar along his jaw, faint and white, and his eyes held the kind of weariness that came from seeing too much too soon. But when he looked at her, something in his expression softened. "I don't doubt that, madam," he said quietly. "My apologies for interfering." Thornton made a disgusted sound and pushed past them both, his shoulder deliberately knocking into Knox as he went. The cowboy barely moved, solid as the mountains surrounding the town. When the mine owner had stormed out into the street, the tension in the room dissolved like smoke, and the patrons gradually returned to their drinks and games. Henderson was already fretting over the broken glass, calling for someone to sweep it up. Octavia stood there for a moment, acutely aware that Knox had not moved away. She could smell leather and sage and something else, something like open sky. "Thank you," she finally said, meeting his eyes, "even if it was unnecessary." A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You always this stubborn. You always this presumptuous." The smile widened into something genuine. "Fair enough. Can I at least buy you a drink to apologize for my presumption?" Octavia knew she should say no. She had learned long ago that accepting drinks from strange men led to complications, and her life was already complicated enough. But there was something about Knox Reeves that made her want to break her own rules. "One drink," she agreed, "but I choose the table." She led him to a corner booth away from the main floor, where she often sat to work on the account books. The afternoon light slanted through the window, turning the dust motes into gold. When they were seated across from each other, Henderson himself brought over 2 glasses of whiskey, his eyebrows raised questioningly at Octavia. She gave him a small nod and he retreated, though she could feel his concerned gaze from across the room. "So," Knox said, lifting his glass. "Do you make a habit of breaking glassware, or was today special?" Despite herself, Octavia laughed. It was a real laugh, not the polite simper she had perfected in the saloons and gaming halls she had worked in over the years. "Today was special. Usually I just use words. I noticed. You have a way with them." "I had a good education," she said, then immediately wished she could take the words back. She never talked about her past, about the life she had left behind in Philadelphia, but Knox did not pry. He simply nodded and took a sip of his whiskey. "Education's a valuable thing, wasted on most of us." "Are you from Colorado?" she asked, steering the conversation away from herself. "Originally from Texas," he said. "Came up here about 4 years ago with a herd, liked the mountains well enough to stay. Bought some land south of here near a place called Evergreen. It's good grazing country. You run cattle and horses. Mostly horses now. There's good money in breeding stock for the miners and the freight companies." He leaned back, his long legs stretched out beneath the table. "It's honest work." There was something in the way he said it, a kind of quiet pride that made Octavia envious. She had not done honest work in years. Oh, the bookkeeping was legitimate enough, but she had also learned to read poker tells, to signal dealers when she spotted card cheats, to smile at drunk miners until they spent twice what they intended. It was survival, but it was not honest. "What brings you to Black Hawk?" she asked. "Supply run. Need to pick up some equipment that's coming in on the stage tomorrow. Figured I'd stay the night, rest my horse." He paused, his eyes searching her face. "Can I ask you something?" Octavia tensed. "You can ask. I might not answer." "That man, Thornton. Is he going to be a problem for you?" She appreciated that he asked rather than assumed. "Probably. He's not the type to let go of a grudge, but I've handled worse." "I don't doubt it," Knox said again, and she realized it was becoming a refrain. He seemed to have a deep respect for her capability, which was unusual in her experience. Most men either saw her as something to be protected or something to be conquered. Knox seemed to see her as simply a person. They talked for another hour as the afternoon wore into evening. Octavia found herself telling him things she rarely shared, about how she had come west after her father's business collapsed, leaving the family in disgrace and debt. She did not tell him everything, not about her mother's depression or the younger siblings she had left in the care of an aunt, not about the letters she sent home each month with most of her wages. But she told him enough. In return, Knox spoke of his ranch, of the mountains that turned purple at sunset, of the elk that came down in the winter, and the way the aspens turned gold in autumn. He talked about his horses with the kind of affection some men reserved for children, describing their personalities and quirks. He had a foreman named Dutch, he said, who was getting too old for the hard work but refused to retire. He had dreams of expanding, of buying more land, of building something that would last. "It sounds beautiful," Octavia said, and meant it. "It is," Knox agreed. "Lonely sometimes, but beautiful." There was a question in his words, something unspoken, and Octavia felt a flutter of panic in her chest. This was happening too fast. She barely knew this man. And yet, when she looked at him across the table, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, she felt something shift inside her, like a door opening that she had kept locked for years. "I should get back to work," she said abruptly, standing. "Henderson will need the evening receipts tallied." Knox stood as well, his movements unhurried. "Of course. Thank you for the conversation, Miss Daniels." "Octavia," she corrected without thinking. His smile was soft. "Octavia, I'm at the boarding house on 3rd Street if you need anything, if Thornton causes trouble." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and walked away before she could do something foolish like ask him to stay. That night, as she worked through the account books in the small room Henderson let her use behind the bar, Octavia could not stop thinking about Knox Reeves. About his steady eyes and his gentle voice, and the way he had stood in that doorway like some kind of avenging angel. About the ranch he described, the life he was building with his own hands. It was a life she could never have. She had debts to pay, a family depending on her. She had learned to survive in gaming halls and saloons, to smile and deflect and keep her true self hidden behind layers of silk and sophistication. She did not belong in a world of mountain meadows and horses and honest work. But God, how she wanted to. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the way mornings did in the Colorado high country. Octavia woke in her small rented room above a seamstress shop, washed her face in the basin, and dressed in her day clothes, a simple gray skirt and white blouse. She had work to do, accounts to settle, and she had nearly convinced herself that yesterday had been an aberration, that she would not see Knox Reeves again. Then she stepped out onto the street and found him waiting outside her door. He looked different in the morning light, his hat in his hands, his expression uncertain. "Morning," he said. "I hope I'm not being too forward, but I wondered if you might have breakfast with me before I head back to the ranch." Octavia should have said no. Should have thanked him politely and gone about her day. Instead, she found herself nodding. "There's a decent restaurant on the next block." They walked together through the morning bustle of Black Hawk, past miners heading to their shifts and freight wagons rumbling over the uneven streets. The restaurant was small and clean, run by a German woman who served thick slices of ham and eggs that had been carried up from Denver. Over breakfast, Knox asked her more questions. What books did she like to read? What had she studied in school? What did she think of Colorado compared to Pennsylvania? "I think," Octavia said carefully, cutting her ham into precise pieces, "that Colorado is wild in a way the East never is. There are fewer rules here, or at least different rules. You like that, she considered. Sometimes. It means a woman can work and support herself without quite as much judgment. But it also means there's less protection when men like Thornton decide they want something. Knox's jaw tightened. He won't bother you again. You can't know that. You're leaving today. I could stay longer. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Octavia set down her fork. Knox, you seem like a good man. A genuinely good man, which is rare, but you don't know me. Not really. Then let me get to know you. Why? She asked, her voice sharper than she intended. What do you want from me? He did not flinch at her tone. I want to see you smile the way you did yesterday when you laughed. I want to hear more of your thoughts on books and mountains and whatever else you care to share. He paused, seeming to search for words. Yesterday, when I walked into that saloon, it was like the whole world shifted into focus. Does that sound crazy? Yes, Octavia whispered. It sounds completely crazy. But I felt it too. The admission cost her something. She saw him recognize that, saw the understanding in his eyes. He reached across the table, his hand palm up, offering. After a moment, she placed her hand in his. His skin was rough with calluses, warm and solid. I'm not a good prospect, she said quietly. I work in a saloon, I have debts, I have family depending on me back east. I have a ranch that barely turns a profit, Knox countered. I have a foreman who drinks too much and a barn that needs a new roof. I'm not exactly a catch myself. That's different and you know it. Is it? He squeezed her hand gently. Octavia, I don't care what you do for work. I care that you're intelligent and brave and you throw glasses at men who disrespect you. Despite everything, she laughed. That's a low bar for attraction. Maybe, but it's honest. There was that word again. Honest. Octavia looked down at their joined hands and felt something like hope flutter in her chest, dangerous and fragile as a moth. Stay one more day, she said. Let me think about this. Let us both think about this. Knox nodded slowly. One more day, he stayed. They spent the afternoon walking through Black Hawk, up the steep streets to where the town gave way to pine forest and exposed granite. Knox pointed out the different peaks, naming them like old friends. Octavia told him about the books she had read, the novels she loved that spoke of adventure and romance in equal measure. I always wanted to see the ocean, she confessed as they sat on a flat rock overlooking the town. I grew up in Philadelphia, but we never went to the coast. My father always said there would be time later. And now I'm here in the mountains as far from the ocean as I can get. She smiled ruefully. Funny how life works. We could go, Knox said suddenly. Not now, but someday. California isn't so far. We could take the train, see the Pacific. Octavia turned to look at him. Knox, we met yesterday. I know. He reached up, his fingers brushing a strand of hair that had escaped her pins. I know it's fast, I know it's crazy. But I'm 26 years old, Octavia, and I've never felt this way about anyone. I'm not saying we should get married tomorrow. I'm just saying let's not pretend this isn't something real. Octavia's breath caught. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he was confusing attraction for something deeper. But she could not make the words come because she felt it too, this pull between them like gravity. I need to be practical, she managed. I can't just run off to a ranch because I met a handsome cowboy who says pretty things. I'm not asking you to run off. I'm asking you to consider the possibility. Knox's hand dropped to cover hers where it rested on the rock between them. Come visit the ranch. This Sunday. Let me show you what I'm offering, and if you don't like it, if you think it's not for you, then I'll respect that and leave you alone. You'll leave me alone? She asked skeptically. Well, I'll try very hard to leave you alone. This time her laugh was easier. One visit. But I'm not making any promises. I wouldn't expect you to. That evening, Knox did not come to the saloon. Octavia was surprised by how much she missed his presence, how her eyes kept drifting to the door. Henderson noticed, because Henderson noticed everything, and he cornered her in the back room when she was closing out the till. "That cowboy," he said without preamble. "He trouble?" "No," Octavia said firmly. "He's actually the opposite of trouble." "Then why do you look like someone facing a firing squad?" She sighed, setting down the ledger. Henderson had been kind to her when she arrived in Black Hawk 6 months ago, desperate and nearly penniless. He had given her work that was respectable, that did not require her to smile at drunk men unless she chose to. She owed him honesty. "He's invited me to visit his ranch," she said, "and I'm considering going." Henderson's bushy eyebrows rose. "You thinking of leaving Black Hawk?" "I don't know what I'm thinking. That's the problem." The older man was quiet for a moment, then he pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. "I'm going to tell you something, Octavia, something I don't usually share. I came out here 20 years ago, young and stupid, looking for gold. Never found any. But I found a woman, a Ute woman who worked as a cook at one of the mining camps. Sarah was her name, though that's not what her people called her." Octavia had never heard Henderson speak of any woman. "What happened?" "I fell in love with her. Hard and fast, just like in those novels you like, but I was a coward. I worried about what people would say, what it would mean for my business, so I waited. I thought we had time." His voice grew rough. "She died of fever that winter. And I've spent 20 years regretting that I didn't just take the chance when I had it." "Henderson," Octavia breathed. "I'm not saying run off with this cowboy," he continued. "I'm just saying don't let fear make your decisions for you. You're young, you're smart, and you deserve a life that's more than just surviving." The words stayed with her through the night and into the next day. When Sunday came, bright and clear, Octavia borrowed a horse from the livery and rode south following Knox's directions. The road wound through pine forests and past clear streams, climbing higher into the mountains before descending into a valley that took her breath away. Knox's ranch sat in a natural bowl surrounded by peaks, still topped with snow despite the late spring. The meadows were green with new grass, and she could see horses grazing in the distance, their coats shining in the sun. The ranch house itself was modest, built of logs chinked with mud, but there was something solid about it, something permanent. Knox emerged from the barn as she rode up, and his face split into a grin that made her heart do foolish things. "You came." "I said I would," Octavia replied, swinging down from the saddle with more grace than she felt. "I keep my promises. Come on, let me show you around." He gave her the tour, introducing her to Dutch, the foreman who was indeed old and grizzled but had eyes that sparkled with humor. She met the horses, a dozen of them in various stages of training, and Knox told her about each one's personality and quirks. There was a paint mare named Daisy who nuzzled her pockets looking for treats, and a young stallion named Thunder who Knox was training for endurance. "He'll be something special," Knox said, his hand on the horse's neck. "Patient, smart, strong. Just needs someone to see his potential." Octavia wondered if he was still talking about the horse. The ranch house was simple inside but clean, with a stone fireplace that dominated one wall and windows that looked out over the valley. There were books on a shelf, which surprised her until Knox explained that his mother had been a schoolteacher back in Texas. "She died when I was 15, he said. "But she made sure I could read and write first. Said it was the only thing that would save me from being just another dumb cowboy." "You're not a dumb cowboy," Octavia said softly, thanks to her. They spent the afternoon riding through the property, Knox pointing out the boundaries of his land and his plans for expansion. He wanted to build a second barn to increase his breeding stock, to maybe start running more cattle again if the market improved. He spoke of the future with such certainty, such hope, that Octavia found herself getting caught up in his vision. "What do you think?" he asked as they sat on a ridge overlooking the ranch as the sun began to set. Octavia was quiet for a long moment, watching the way the light turned the mountains purple and gold. "I think it's beautiful. I think you're building something real here." "But," she turned to look at him, "but I don't know if I fit into this world, Knox. I'm a city girl who happens to be stranded in the mountains. I don't know anything about ranching or horses or any of this. You could learn, maybe, but there's more to it than that." She took a breath. "The life I left behind in Philadelphia, it wasn't just poverty. My father made bad investments, borrowed money from people who don't forgive debts. I've been sending money home to pay those debts, to keep my mother and siblings safe. If I stop, if I just disappear to play rancher's wife, there will be consequences." Knox's expression was serious. "How much do you owe? It's not your problem." "How much, Octavia?" she told him. The number was staggering, at least to her. She watched his face, waiting for him to flinch, to pull back, to realize that she was not worth this kind of complication. Instead, he nodded slowly. "That's about what I'd need to build the second barn and buy the additional breeding stock I want, so it's not impossible. It's just money." "Just money," she repeated incredulously. "I'm not saying it's not important," Knox clarified. "I'm saying it's solvable. You keep working at Henderson's, I keep building the ranch. We pool our resources. Maybe in a year, maybe two, we've paid off the debt and we're ahead." "You're talking about a partnership. I'm talking about more than that, and you know it." He shifted closer, his eyes intense. "I'm talking about building a life together. You said you don't fit into my world. Fine. Then we'll build our own, one that has room for both of us." Octavia felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever offered her anything like this. Not a rescue, not a handout, but a true partnership. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too," Knox said, and the honesty of it undid something in her chest. She kissed him. It was not planned, not calculated, just a sudden need to close the distance between them. His lips were warm and gentle, and he tasted like coffee and possibility. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Not forever, not yet, just tonight. Let me make you dinner and we can talk more about what this could look like." Octavia knew she should say no, should maintain some kind of propriety, but propriety had never gotten her anything but heartache. "Okay," she said. "I'll stay." Dinner was simple. Beans and cornbread that Knox made with the ease of someone used to cooking for himself. They ate at the rough wooden table and talked until the stars came out, bright and endless in the mountain sky. Dutch had made himself scarce, riding down to check the far pasture and tactfully staying away. Knox told her about his childhood in Texas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the hard years after his mother died when his father drank away the family farm. He told her about coming to Colorado with nothing but a horse and a saddle, about working other people's ranches until he had saved enough to buy this land. "I want to build something that lasts," he said. "Something my mother would have been proud of." Octavia told him about her own mother, about the woman who had once hosted tea parties and now took in mending to make ends meet, about her two younger sisters who deserved better than the poverty they had been born into, about the weight of being the oldest, of knowing that her choices affected all of them. "I sent them $40 last month," she said. "It's never enough, but it's something." "We'll send more," Knox promised. "Together, we'll make sure they're taken care of." That "we" again, so casual and yet so profound. When it grew late, Knox offered her his bed and said he would sleep in the barn. But Octavia found herself not wanting to be alone, not wanting to lose this feeling of connection. So she asked him to stay, to just hold her while she slept. He did, wrapped around her in the narrow bed, his breath warm against her neck. "I'll never fit into your world," she whispered into the darkness. Knox's arms tightened around her. "Then we'll build our own." The next morning, Octavia rode back to Black Hawk with a lightness in her chest she had not felt in years. She and Knox had talked through breakfast, making actual plans. She would continue working for Henderson, saving every penny she could. Knox would focus on the horse breeding, which had better profit margins than cattle. They would see each other on Sundays, her day off. In 6 months, they would reassess and see if they had made enough progress to consider taking the next step. It was practical. It was cautious. It was the smart thing to do. But when she walked into the saloon that afternoon and found Thornton waiting for her, Octavia realized that the universe did not care about smart plans. "Miss Daniels," Thornton said, his voice oily with false politeness, "we need to talk." "I have nothing to say to you," Octavia replied, trying to move past him. He caught her arm, not roughly but firmly enough to stop her. "I think you do. You see, I've been making some inquiries about you, about your family back in Philadelphia." Octavia's blood turned to ice. "Let go of me." "Interesting story," Thornton continued as if she had not spoken. "Prominent family, fallen on hard times. Father who made some very bad decisions, borrowed money from some very bad people, and a daughter who ran away west to try to save them. That's none of your business." "I'm making it my business." Thornton smiled, and it was not pleasant. "You see, I have connections back east, and I'm willing to bet those people your father owes would be very interested to know where you are, how much you're making." It was blackmail, pure and simple. Octavia felt her carefully constructed plans crumbling around her. "What do you want?" "I want you to be nicer to me," Thornton said. "I want you to have dinner with me. I want you to stop throwing glasses and act like a proper woman. And if I don't, then I send a telegram east. And I wonder what happens to your family when those creditors decide to collect." Octavia wanted to fight, wanted to throw another glass at his smug face, but she could not risk her family's safety on pride. "Fine," she said, the word tasting like ash. "One dinner. That's more like it." Thornton released her arm. "Tonight, 8 o'clock, the restaurant at the hotel." He walked away, and Octavia stood there trembling with rage and fear. Henderson appeared at her elbow a moment later, his face concerned. "What did he want? To make my life miserable," Octavia said bitterly. "And he's doing a fine job of it." She should have told Knox. She knew that. But when Sunday came and he rode into town to meet her, Octavia found she could not bring herself to share what had happened. He was so happy, so full of plans and hope. He told her about a buyer who was interested in 2 of his horses, about the progress Dutch had made repairing the fence line, about how he had started clearing ground for the new barn. "In another few months, we'll be ahead," Knox said, his hand warm in hers as they walked along the creek outside of town. "I can feel it, Octavia. Everything's coming together." She smiled and nodded and tried to ignore the guilt gnawing at her stomach. She had been to 3 dinners with Thornton now. Painful affairs where she sat stiffly while he talked at her about his mining operations and his importance in the community. She had not let him touch her beyond offering his arm, had not encouraged him in any way, but she knew it was only a matter of time before he demanded more. The worst part was that Knox could tell something was wrong. He asked her about it gently, concerned, and she made up excuses about being tired, about Henderson working her too hard. Knox believed her because he trusted her, and that trust made the lies even more corrosive. It all came to a head one Saturday night in late June. Thornton had cornered her after one of their dinners, trying to kiss her in the hotel hallway. Octavia had shoved him away hard enough that he stumbled, and his mask of civility had finally cracked. "You're going to regret that," he hissed. "I regret ever agreeing to this farce," Octavia shot back. "Then I suppose it's time I made good on my promise." Thornton straightened his jacket. "I'll send that telegram first thing Monday morning." "Wait," Octavia said desperately. "Please, what do you want? I'll do whatever you want, just leave my family alone." The smile that crossed his face made her skin crawl. "Whatever I want," she knew what he was implying. Knew that she was out of options and out of time. She opened her mouth to agree to sacrifice herself for her family's safety when a familiar voice cut through the night. "Step away from her, Thornton." Knox stood at the end of the hallway, and in the lamplight, he looked dangerous in a way Octavia had never seen. His hand rested on his revolver, and his eyes were flat and cold. Thornton laughed, but it sounded nervous. "This doesn't concern you, Reeves." "Anything involving Octavia concerns me." Knox moved closer, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Now I'm going to ask one more time, step away from her. Or what? You'll shoot me. In the middle of town, if I have to." Octavia found her voice. "Knox, don't. It's not worth it." "You're wrong," Knox said, his eyes never leaving Thornton. "You're worth everything." Something in his absolute certainty broke through her fear. Octavia stepped away from Thornton, moving to Knox's side. "He's been blackmailing me. He found out about my family's debts, threatened to tell the creditors where I am if I didn't have dinner with him." Knox's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "That's so. She's lying," Thornton blustered. "She's been perfectly willing." "Shut up." Knox's voice cracked like a whip. "You're going to listen very carefully, Thornton. You're going to forget everything you learned about Octavia's family. You're going to leave her alone. And if I hear that you've bothered her again, if I even hear that you've looked at her wrong, I'm going to make sure everyone in this county knows exactly what kind of man you are. You can't threaten me. I have influence, and I have nothing to lose," Knox interrupted. "Which one of us do you think is more dangerous?" There was a long moment where Octavia was certain violence was about to erupt. Then Thornton seemed to deflate, his bluster fading. "Fine. She's not worth the trouble anyway." He pushed past them both and disappeared down the stairs. Octavia stood there shaking, and then Knox's arms were around her, pulling her close. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I was ashamed," Octavia admitted, "and I didn't want to burden you with my problems. Your problems are my problems." "That's what this is, Octavia. That's what we're building." He pulled back enough to look at her face. "But we can't do this if you don't trust me." "I do trust you. I just don't trust myself. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and this will all be a dream, and I'll be back in Philadelphia in my father's ruined house with nothing and no one." Knox cupped her face in his hands. "This is real. I'm real, and I'm not going anywhere." She kissed him then, there in the hotel hallway with tears streaming down her face. It was not gentle or sweet but desperate, a drowning woman clinging to shore. When they broke apart, she rested her head against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. "Come home with me," Knox said. "Tonight, not to stay forever if you're not ready, but come home with me and let me take care of you." "Knox, we're not married. People will talk." "Let them talk." "Octavia, I'm asking you to take a leap of faith here. I know it's scary. I know you have responsibilities and debts and 100 reasons to be practical. But sometimes you have to choose what makes you happy, not just what makes sense." Octavia thought about Henderson's story, about his lost love and his lifetime of regret. She thought about her mother, who had married for security and ended up in poverty anyway. She thought about all the careful plans she had made and how none of them had accounted for falling in love. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's go home." They left that night, riding through the darkness with just the stars to guide them. Octavia had stopped by her room long enough to gather her few possessions, had left a note for Henderson explaining that she was leaving Black Hawk, but would write to him soon. Knox had his horse, and they had borrowed another from the livery with a promise to return it within the week. The ranch looked different in the moonlight, silvered and magical. Dutch was awake when they arrived, and if he was surprised to see Octavia, he did not show it. He simply nodded, said he would take care of the horses, and disappeared into the barn. Inside the house, Knox lit a lamp and then turned to her. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." Octavia's heart raced. "All right. Do you love me?" "Because I love you, Octavia Daniels. I have since the moment you threw that glass and stood up to Thornton like some kind of warrior queen. And if you don't feel the same way, if you're just here because you're scared or because I'm convenient, then I need to know now." She looked at him in the lamplight, this man who had offered her everything without asking for anything in return. This man who had seen her at her worst and decided she was worth fighting for. "I love you," she said, and the words felt like unlocking a door she had kept barred for years. "I love you so much it terrifies me." Knox's smile was like sunrise. He crossed to her in 2 strides and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the small room. When he set her down, he kissed her properly, thoroughly, until she was breathless and laughing. "Marry me," he said against her lips. "We barely know each other. We know the important things. We know we make each other laugh. We know we want the same kind of life. We know we're stronger together than apart." He pulled back to look at her. "Marry me, Octavia. Let's build this life we've been talking about." She should have said they needed more time, should have been practical and cautious and smart. Instead, she said, yes. They were married a week later by a circuit preacher who came through the valley. Dutch and his wife Martha served as witnesses, and afterward, there was a simple celebration with cornbread and wild strawberries Martha had picked from the meadow. It was nothing like the society wedding Octavia had once imagined for herself, back when she was a girl in Philadelphia who thought she would marry some lawyer or banker and live a conventional life. It was better. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Octavia had never run a household, had never cooked more than the most basic meals. Knox was patient, teaching her how to manage the wood stove, how to make bread that did not turn out like rocks. Martha helped too, showing her how to preserve food for winter, how to tend a garden in the thin mountain soil. But Octavia brought her own skills to the partnership. She took over the ranch accounts, organizing the finances in a way that let Knox see exactly where they stood. She helped with the horse training, discovering she had a natural way with the animals. And she wrote letters, dozens of them, to potential buyers and breeders, expanding their market beyond the local area. By late summer, they had sold 4 horses for prices that made Knox whoop with joy. By autumn, when the aspens turned gold just like he had promised, they had paid off a quarter of Octavia's family debt. "At this rate, we'll be clear in 2 years, Knox said one evening as they reviewed the books together. "Maybe less if we have a good breeding season next spring." Octavia leaned against him, content. "I still can't believe this is my life. Better or worse than you imagined, different," she said honestly. "Harder in some ways, but happier." The hardness came from the isolation, the long winters that kept them snowed in for weeks at a time, the constant work of running a ranch. Octavia learned to shoot, to ride better, to read the weather in the mountains. She learned which horses were ready to sell and which needed more time. She learned the satisfaction of seeing something grow from her own effort. She also learned what it meant to be part of a community. The ranchers and farmers in the valley might have gossiped about Knox's hasty marriage to a saloon girl, but they also showed up when the barn roof needed repairs. They invited the newlyweds to dances and church socials. They offered advice and seeds and, occasionally, gentle teasing about how city-soft Octavia had gone mountain tough. Martha became a particular friend. The older woman was half Ute, her mother having been from one of the bands that once roamed the mountains, and she taught Octavia things about the land that no white settler knew. How to find medicinal plants, how to read animal signs, how to move through the forest without making a sound. "You're not like most white women," Martha said one day as they picked wild herbs. "You listen." "I've learned that I don't know as much as I thought I did," Octavia replied. "That's wisdom. Knox chose well." The words warmed her more than she expected. She had spent so long feeling like she did not belong anywhere that having Martha's approval felt like a gift. When winter came, deep and cold, Octavia and Knox learned to entertain themselves during the long, dark evenings. They read together. She perched in his lap while he held the book. They played cards, though Octavia's saloon skills meant she won more often than not. They made love in the warmth of their bed while the wind howled outside, learning each other's bodies with the patience of people who had a lifetime ahead of them. And they talked, endlessly, about everything and nothing. About the ranch's future, about children they might have, about whether they should expand into cattle or focus solely on horses, about books and politics, and whether they would ever make it to see that ocean Octavia still dreamed about. "Someday," Knox promised, "when the ranch is stable and your family's debt is paid, we'll take a trip, see the Pacific, maybe go all the way to San Francisco. You do that, leave the ranch. Dutch can handle it for a week or two. And yeah, I'd do that. I'd do anything to see you happy, Octavia." She believed him. That was the remarkable thing. After a lifetime of learning to trust no one, she believed Knox Reeves with her whole heart. Spring came late to the mountains that year, snow lingering into May. But when it finally arrived, it brought a letter from Octavia's mother. The first real letter, not just the brief acknowledgments she had received in response to the money she sent. Octavia read it in the morning light, her hands trembling. Her mother wrote of how the family's situation had improved, how they had been able to move to a better house, how Octavia's sisters were back in school. She wrote of her pride in her daughter's strength and courage. And at the end, she wrote something that made Octavia's eyes fill with tears. "I hope you have found happiness in your new life. I hope you are building something beautiful. You always deserved more than we could give you, my darling girl. Be well. Be loved." Knox found her crying on the porch, the letter clutched in her hand. He read it over her shoulder, then wrapped his arms around her from behind. "She's proud of you," he murmured. "I abandoned them. No, you saved them. There's a difference." He turned her to face him. "And you don't have to choose anymore, Octavia. We're going to keep helping them. We're going to pay off that debt. But you're also allowed to have your own life." That spring was their best yet. 3 of their mares foaled, producing strong, healthy colts that buyers were already inquiring about. Knox's reputation as a horse breeder was spreading, and they had inquiries from as far away as Wyoming and New Mexico. Octavia's letters had done their job, creating a network of buyers who trusted the quality of their stock. By summer, they had paid off half the debt. By autumn, 3/4. And on a cold November day, Knox rode into Black Hawk and sent a telegram east with the final payment. When he returned to the ranch, he found Octavia in the barn with one of the new foals, a pretty bay filly with a white star on her forehead. She looked up when he entered, and he must have had something in his expression because she stood quickly. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Knox pulled the telegram receipt from his pocket. "It's done. The debt is paid." Octavia stared at him. "All of it, all of it. Your family is free and clear." She burst into tears, loud, ugly sobs that scared the foal and brought Dutch running from the other side of the barn. Knox just held her, let her cry out years of fear and guilt and worry. When she finally calmed, he tilted her face up to his. "You did it," he said softly. "You saved them." "We did it," Octavia corrected. "I couldn't have done this alone, Knox. That's the point of building our own world, remember? We don't have to do anything alone." That night, they celebrated with Dutch and Martha, a simple dinner that felt like a feast. Martha had made a cake, somehow knowing that today would be special. Dutch broke out a bottle of whiskey he had been saving. They toasted to new beginnings and debts paid and the future spreading out before them like the valley below the ranch. Later, alone in their bedroom, Knox pulled Octavia into his arms. "I have something to tell you." She looked up at him, curious. "What?" "I've been talking to the neighboring rancher, Old Man Peterson. He's looking to sell, wants to move down to Denver to be near his daughter. His property borders ours to the east." Octavia's mind raced. "How much?" "A lot. But we have buyers lined up for the spring foals, and if we're careful, we could do it." Knox paused. "It would mean we're committed to this life, to this place. No leaving for the city, no safety net." "I don't want a safety net," Octavia said firmly. "I want this. I want you and this ranch and this life we're building. I want to expand and grow and see how big we can make this dream." Knox's smile was brilliant. "Then let's do it." They bought the Peterson property that winter, doubling the size of their ranch. It meant long days and hard work, meant hiring on more hands in addition to Dutch. But it also meant more grazing land, more room to expand the breeding program, more of a future to build. Octavia found herself managing not just the books, but the household staff, coordinating with buyers, even occasionally traveling to Denver to meet with potential clients. She was not the frightened saloon girl anymore, not the woman who had thrown a glass because she did not know how else to defend herself. She was a rancher's wife, a businesswoman in her own right, a woman who had built her own world and filled it with purpose. And then, in the spring of 1878, she realized she was pregnant. She told Knox on a Sunday morning, the kind of perfect mountain day where the sky was impossibly blue and the meadows were full of wildflowers. They had ridden out to check on the far pasture and she had been working up the courage for an hour. "I have news," she finally said. Knox looked over at her, concerned by her serious tone. "What kind of news?" "The good kind, I think, I hope." She took a breath. "I'm pregnant, Knox. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, he just stared at her. Then he let out a whoop that startled the horses and pulled her from her saddle into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We're having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We're going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Octavia asked, needing to hear it. "Happy, Octavia, I'm beyond happy. I'm terrified and thrilled and can't wait to meet this little person we made." He set her down carefully, his hands going to her still flat stomach. "Boy or girl, too early to know. But I'm hoping for a boy who looks like you. I'm hoping for a girl who's as fierce as her mother." The pregnancy was not easy. Octavia was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep food down. Then, as summer came, she felt better but grew enormous, her body changing in ways that embarrassed and amazed her. Knox was endlessly patient, rubbing her swollen feet, helping her up from chairs, telling her she was beautiful even when she felt like a whale. Martha was a godsend, teaching Octavia what to expect, preparing her for the birth. "It will hurt," the older woman said bluntly. "But women have been doing this since the beginning of time. You're strong enough." The baby came on a cold night in early December, 3 weeks earlier than expected. Octavia's labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Knox, pacing outside the bedroom door while Martha attended to his wife, thought he might lose his mind with worry. But finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, he heard the thin wail of a newborn. Martha emerged, tired but smiling. "You have a son, and Octavia is fine, though she's exhausted." Knox barely heard the last part. He pushed into the room and found Octavia propped up against the pillows, her hair soaked with sweat, her face pale with exhaustion. And in her arms, wrapped in a blanket Martha had made, was the smallest, most perfect human being he had ever seen. "Knox," Octavia whispered, "come meet your son." He approached slowly, almost afraid to touch something so fragile. But when Octavia placed the baby in his arms, Knox felt something in his chest expand beyond reason. The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably change color but were currently a deep blue. His tiny fist waved in the air, and when Knox offered his finger, the baby gripped it with surprising strength. "He's perfect," Knox breathed. "What should we name him?" Octavia asked. They had discussed names for months but never settled on one. Now, looking at his son's face, Knox thought of his mother, of the woman who had taught him to read and believe in something better. "James," he said. "After my mother's father, if that's all right with you." Octavia smiled. "James Reeves, it's perfect." The first year of James's life was a blur of sleepless nights and constant worry and moments of joy so profound they took Knox's breath away. Watching Octavia nurse their son, seeing her sing lullabies in the rocking chair he had made, witnessing her transformation into a mother, it made him fall in love with her all over again. The ranch continued to thrive. Dutch had taken on more responsibility, managing the day-to-day operations while Knox and Octavia focused on the breeding program and James. They had hired 2 young men from town, brothers named Sam and Thomas, who showed real talent with the horses. By the time James was walking, the ranch was one of the most successful in the region. They had 15 breeding mares, 2 prime stallions, and a reputation for quality that brought buyers from 3 states. The house had been expanded, adding a proper nursery and a larger kitchen. They had even installed one of the new iron cook stoves, a luxury that made Martha clap her hands with delight. But more than the material success, Knox and Octavia had built something else, a real home, a place where friends gathered for dinners that stretched late into the evening, a place where James took his first steps and spoke his first words, a place where 2 people who had started with nothing created everything that mattered. On their 3rd anniversary, Knox surprised Octavia with train tickets to San Francisco. "But James," she protested. "And the ranch, Martha and Dutch will watch James, and Sam and Thomas can handle the ranch for a week. We're going to see the ocean, Octavia. I promised you that, remember?" So they went, leaving their toddler son in Martha's capable hands and boarding the train in Denver. It was Octavia's first time on a train, and she pressed her face to the window like a child, watching the landscape change from mountains to desert to valley. They spent 3 days in San Francisco, walking along the wharves, eating fresh seafood, and finally standing on the beach and watching the Pacific Ocean roll in. "It's bigger than I imagined," Octavia said, her hand in Knox's. "Everything is," he replied. "Our lives, our ranch, what we've built together, it's all bigger and better than I could have dreamed." She turned to look at him, this man who had seen her at her worst and decided she was worth everything. "Do you ever regret it, walking into that saloon that day?" "Never." "Not for a single second." Knox pulled her close. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Octavia Reeves. You and James and this life we're living." "I love you," she said, the words as easy now as breathing. "I love you too, always." They returned to the ranch renewed, ready to tackle whatever came next, And what came next was growth, steady and constant. Another baby, a daughter they named Caroline, who had her mother's green eyes and fierce spirit. An expansion of the ranch buildings, adding a proper barn and a bunkhouse for the hired hands. Letters from Octavia's mother, now living comfortably in a small house in Philadelphia. The debts long paid and the family restored to respectability. And through it all, Knox and Octavia worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word. They argued sometimes about money or horses or how to discipline the children. But they always came back to each other, to the foundation they had built that first year when they decided to create their own world. James grew into a boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. Caroline was as stubborn and clever as her mother. And in 1882, they welcomed a second son, Daniel, who was quiet and thoughtful from the start. The ranch had become a true operation by then, with a dozen employees and contracts with the Army for cavalry horses. Knox's dream of building something lasting had come true, and he made sure to tell his children the story of how it started, with their mother throwing a glass at a man who disrespected her, and him deciding in that moment that he had to know her. Was it love at first sight? Caroline asked one evening when she was 7 and fascinated by romance. Knox and Octavia exchanged a look. "Not exactly," Octavia said. "It was more like recognition, like we both knew the other person was going to be important, even if we didn't know how yet." "Your mother told me she would never fit into my world," Knox added, pulling Octavia against his side. "So I told her we'd build our own." "And did you?" James asked. Knox looked around the comfortable room at his children sprawled on the floor, at the fire crackling in the hearth, at his wife warm against him. Through the window, he could see the mountains turning purple in the twilight, the barn where 17 horses were settling for the night, the land that stretched as far as the eye could see. "Yeah," he said softly, "we did." The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. James, at 18, was already managing much of the horse training, showing a natural talent that made Knox's chest swell with pride. Caroline, at 15, had her mother's head for numbers and was helping with the business side of the ranch. And Daniel, at 12, was the dreamer, always with his nose in a book or wandering the mountains drawing the wildlife he saw. Octavia had aged gracefully, her dark hair now shot through with silver, laugh lines crinkling around her eyes. Knox had more gray than dark in his hair now, and his back ached on cold mornings, but he still rode every day, still loved the work of the ranch. They had built more than just a successful business. They had built a legacy, a place that would continue long after they were gone. And they had built a love story, one that started with a glass thrown in anger and grew into something that sustained them through every challenge. On a warm evening in June of 1890, Knox and Octavia celebrated their 14th anniversary. The children had planned a surprise party, inviting Dutch and Martha, Sam and Thomas and their families, neighbors from throughout the valley. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, stories told and retold about the early days of the ranch. When the party finally wound down and the guests departed, Knox and Octavia found themselves alone on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. They sat in comfortable silence, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "You remember what you told me that first night at the ranch?" Octavia asked. "I told you a lot of things. You said my problems were your problems. That we couldn't build a life together if I didn't trust you." Knox smiled in the darkness. "I remember. I've been thinking about that, about how scared I was, how certain I was that I didn't deserve any of this." Octavia lifted her head to look at him. "Thank you for proving me wrong." You did the hard work, Octavia. You chose to trust me to take that leap. All I did was promise to catch you. You did more than catch me. You taught me to fly." Knox kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 14 years of partnership and love and shared dreams. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "Here's to the next 14 years," he murmured. "And all the years after that," Octavia agreed. They sat there until the stars were fully out, until the night grew cool and they could hear Daniel moving around in his room above, probably reading by candlelight despite being told to sleep. They sat there and counted their blessings, naming each one. Their children, their home, their work, their friends, their health, their love. It was not the life Octavia had imagined for herself when she was a girl in Philadelphia dreaming of adventure. It was not the life Knox had envisioned when he was a young man leaving Texas with nothing but hope and determination. It was better, because they had built it together, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. They had taken the broken pieces of their separate pasts and created something whole and beautiful. They had proven that sometimes the best things in life are not the ones you plan for, but the ones you build when you meet someone who makes you want to try. Years later, when Knox was 60 and Octavia was 56, they would stand in the same spot and watch James bring home his own bride, a school teacher from Denver named Sarah, who loved the mountains as much as he did. They would dance at Caroline's, wedding to a lawyer from Colorado Springs, a good man who treated her like the treasure she was. They would watch Daniel leave for university in the East, following his dream of becoming an artist, and they would be proud even as they missed him. They would welcome grandchildren, 6 of them in total, who would run through the ranch like wild things and learn to ride before they could properly walk. They would watch the ranch continue to grow and evolve, adapting to new times while maintaining the foundation they had laid. And through it all, Knox and Octavia would remain partners, their love deepening with each passing year. They would argue sometimes about the grandchildren's discipline or whether to invest in new breeding stock. They would laugh at private jokes and hold hands like newlyweds. They would sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the sun set over the mountains they had made their home. When Knox was 72, on a cold February morning, he woke before dawn as was his habit and did not rise from bed. Octavia, who had been married to him for 36 years, knew immediately that something was wrong. She held his hand as the children were summoned, as the doctor confirmed what she already knew in her heart. His heart was failing, worn out after a lifetime of hard work and deep feeling. "I'm not afraid," Knox told her that evening, his voice weak but steady. "I've had the best life a man could ask for." "Don't," Octavia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Don't say goodbye yet. Not goodbye, never goodbye." Knox squeezed her hand with what little strength he had left. "You made me so happy, Octavia. From that first day in the saloon until now, you've made me so happy." "You saved me," she said. "No, we saved each other." He smiled, that same gentle smile he had given her so many times over the years. "We built our own world, remember, and it was beautiful." Knox Reeves died that night with his wife holding his hand, and his children gathered around him. He was buried on a hillside overlooking the ranch, in sight of the house he had built and the mountains he had loved. At his funeral, dozens of people came to pay their respects, all of them with stories about his kindness, his integrity, his skill with horses. But the truest testament to his life was Octavia herself, who stood at the graveside with her children and grandchildren around her. A woman who had been lost and broken and had found herself in the arms of a cowboy who had promised to build her a world. She lived another 12 years after Knox passed, managing the ranch with James's help, watching her grandchildren grow, writing long letters to Daniel about life and love and loss. She never remarried, though she had offers. Knox had been her great love, her once in a lifetime, and she was content with the memories they had made, on a spring morning much like the one when they had first brought James home. Octavia sat on the porch and watched the sun rise over the mountains. She was 82 years old, her body failing but her mind still sharp. Around her, the ranch bustled with activity, James directing the hands, his own children helping with the horses, the next generation learning the work. She thought about that girl she had been, so many years ago, standing in a saloon with a broken glass at her feet. She thought about the man who had walked through the door and changed everything. She thought about the choice she had made to trust him, to build something new, to believe in the possibility of happiness. "We did it," she whispered to the morning. "We built our own world, Knox, and it was more beautiful than I ever dreamed." When Octavia Reeves passed away peacefully in her sleep that night, she was buried next to her husband on the hillside overlooking the ranch. Their children and grandchildren gathered once more, and this time there were great-grandchildren too, the newest generation of a family built on love and trust and hard work. The ranch continued, passed down through the years, its success a testament to the foundation Knox and Octavia had laid. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Colorado mountains and the horses whinnied softly in their stalls, those who knew the story could almost feel their presence still. Two people who had refused to accept the world as it was and had built their own instead together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of trust and love at a time. Their world had been beautiful, and it had been theirs.